The age-old question, would it be better to spell Polish with the Cyrillic alphabet? Is the Latin alphabet really ill-suited for this language, unlike the pristine Cyrillic alphabet, tailor-made to represent all the quirks of Slavic languages? I have seen many such comments throughout the years, some very strong opinions. Usually the stronger the opinion, the less whoever wrote it seemed to know what they were talking about, which is par for the course in linguistics. Thankfully, today I have the definitive answer to this question. And the answer is, it doesn't fucking matter. I mean, for God's sake, they're both alphabets. They're not really that different. The reality is, Polish could be spelled using either alphabet just fine, or any other alphabet for that matter. There's pros and cons to both, so let's explore them. Let me start by stating the obvious. At the end of the day, this is just a thought experiment. Obviously, no one sensible actually thinks that Polish should switch to Cyrillic, like, in real life. The current orthography is completely fine. All the issues it poses to native speakers have nothing to do with the Latinness of the alphabet. But linguists like to play around with languages and try different stuff because it's fun. And also, you need to understand that spelling reforms are what we live for. It's like, imagine your favorite game you've been playing for 20 years suddenly gets a new DLC. And when it comes to spelling reforms in Polish, they've been boring as fuck. I mean, we're getting a new one in 2026 apparently, but it boils down to capitalization, spacing, and punctuation. Wow, so exciting. So, when are we replacing DZ with X like in Albanian? You know what I mean? We've been getting blue-balled for the past century. So, let's think about it. What would a hypothetical Cyrillic orthography for Polish look like? As it turns out, for the most part, it's rather straightforward. Let's look at vowels first. Slavic languages love palatalizing everything that comes their way, so the Cyrillic alphabet has separate letters for plain and iotated vowels. The latter render the preceding consonants palatalized, or if they're not preceded by a consonant, they start with y. In Polish, these are spelled with a preceding I after consonants and a j otherwise. We also have a pair which in Polish is spelled with two separate letters, I and Y. There are two more things we need to consider. One has to do with nasal vowels. In all Slavic languages that use Cyrillic, nasal vowels have disappeared, so the letters used to represent them aren't actually used, but we can bring them back, and I mean, who wouldn't want to have these eldritch creatures in their alphabet? They don't correspond to the same vowels they used to be in Old Church Slavonic. In Polish, the nasal vowels merged and split up again at some point, but at least phonetically, they represent the same nasal vowels found in modern Polish, and there's an iotated version for either, which is perfect. So the new additions to our alphabet would include small yus, small iotated yus, big yus, and big iotated yus.
トライアングルからの、メニレグスからの、T 突き刺さり。
The other issue is this letter. Polish used to have vowel length distinction, but then long vowels shifted. Eventually they all merged with their short counterparts with one exception. The long O rose to O and eventually U, and the old spelling was preserved. Something similar happened on the other side of the vowel space with E raising to E, a spelling which is still preserved in some older literature, but only to preserve rhymes. It did lower back to E later though. O acute mostly has fans among Polish learners because it helps them remember that in inflected forms it sometimes shifts to O, but for a native it does more harm than good because you have to remember which one to use and you already know how to inflect words anyway. So, because orthographies aren't made with L2 speakers in mind, and because there are plenty of other vowel mutations in Polish that aren't indicated in any way, I would just merge it with a regular U. So this is one of the things people mean when they say Cyrillic is made for Slavic languages. Because of the abundant palatalization, having separate iotated vowels makes text shorter. And although this argument doesn't really convince me because I'd rather just type an I before a vowel than have to remember how to locate like 15 separate vowels on a keyboard, I can accept it. But it's not what I usually see people bring up in this debate. The thing people do bring up is the following. And this is not a bit, this is an actual argument that people make with a straight face. Get ready for this shit. Polish has retroflex sounds, which it represents with these pesky digraphs. But Cyrillic has separate letters for them. Yeah, and so does, I don't know, Georgian. There's even a letter that nasalizes the preceding vowel. Maybe we should use Georgian instead. Look, I don't know where this anti-digraph cabal came from, but let me fill you in on the scoop. Almost all languages using the Latin alphabet have digraphs, including Latin. Turns out transcribing foreign sounds sometimes requires that. For example, Latin didn't have a sh sound, and most European languages do, so they had to come up with some strategy of representing it. But, I mean, I've never heard anyone argue that English should use Cyrillic because it has a letter for sh or ch and Latin doesn't. Wait, what is this? Oh god, fuck. I've almost never heard anyone argue that English should use Cyrillic because it has a letter for sh and Latin doesn't. Nor have I ever heard anyone complain about the combination S plus H to represent it, so clearly people don't have an issue with digraphs as a whole, so what is it? Could it be that their argument boils down to these digraphs don't look like the digraphs in normal languages, so they're counterintuitive? No, I must be crazy. Don't you know I'm loco? With that being said, let's look at how Polish consonants would be spelled in Cyrillic. Because we have iotated vowels, there is no need for separate letters for soft consonants. So all of these can be discarded, and the same goes for RZ, which comes from a palatalized R. L is also no longer needed since it's actually a basic consonant, and its counterpart L, although it looks inconspicuous in the current Polish orthography, is actually just a soft L in disguise. There are a few things to address here. First is the merger of CH and H. Now, these have the same pronunciation in modern Polish, and I know there are going to be people being like, no, my 95-year-old grandma from Zadupie Dolne, 4 miles down the road from the Ukrainian border, still pronounces them as two separate sounds. You can't just merge them, they're totally different. Look, we're talking about the standard language here. I don't care about marginal dialects. I'm sorry, rip bozo, suck my dick. Also, both graphemes are basically in complementary distribution, so grammar will be fine, don't worry. H is pretty much a foreign intruder, so honestly it should assimilate or get the fuck back to its country. The second thing to address is the lack of merger of j and rz. RZ comes from a palatal R, and that's how I chose to represent it. It makes sense when you look at inflections and greatly increases intelligibility with other Slavic languages. And by the way, this is the same reason ch and j are represented as palatal T and D. But this is not the primary reason. RZ actually works differently than j in Polish. For one, it helps to distinguish between j and dj, one of which is an affricate and the other isn't. Now, this wouldn't be an issue if I used a separate letter for j, but I went with the Russian route of using a digraph because A, this letter is gross, and B, j is a marginal phoneme in Polish. It mostly occurs in loanwords and in sequences like zj or jj, so I don't think it warrants a separate letter. The other argument for preserving the distinction between the two zhs is how they work in clusters. Obstruent clusters in Polish must agree in voicing, which is determined by the final consonant in the cluster, with two exceptions. One is W because it used to be a sonorant, and the other is RZ because it used to be a sonorant. So, preserving the distinction between these two graphemes helps in showing how to pronounce obstruent clusters. Let's look at soft consonants again. We know that they can be marked with iotated vowels, but if they occur in coda position, that's not a viable option, so in that case we can use the soft sign, a letter which used to be a vowel, but then it was lost in Slavic languages, so now it's used to soften consonants. There are also cases in which hard consonants occur before iotated vowels, most commonly in loanwords and when applying prefixes, in which case we can use the hard sign, which also used to be a vowel that was lost, so the letter was repurposed. Except for Bulgarian, it's still a vowel there. So far so good. The issues start cropping up when we look at clusters. In general, clusters are hard or soft in their entirety, so an iotated vowel or a soft sign softens all preceding consonants. However, this is not always the case. Take a syllable like this. Is this ćvje as in ćvjek or tvje as in tvjerza? If we want to be consistent, we would say that this represents the first option because the whole cluster is palatalized. And the second option would require a hard sign after T to preserve its pronunciation. This feels pretty unnatural, at least to me, especially if you look at a word like tverj. We need a hard sign after the T to prevent it from becoming ch, and then we have a soft sign after the final D to turn it into j, but then a hard sign after R so it doesn't become zh. This is very bloated. And sure, zh is not a possible cluster in Polish, but do you really have to know which consonants can occur next to each other in Polish to figure out how to spell words? Because I don't think anyone does. Here are some more examples of such non-harmonic clusters. What do we do with those? I feel like we only have two options. One is to be fully consistent and make a simple rule. Palatalizers soften all preceding consonants, and any exceptions have to be marked with the hard sign. This makes words longer and more convoluted than they need to be, but it is phonetically accurate. The other is to just go with the flow, not overuse these two symbols, and let the reader figure out the pronunciation from context. This feels more natural, but sacrifices the biggest benefit of the current Polish orthography, which is predictability. If you see a word written down, you can almost always tell how to sound it out. This has always been the biggest issue to me with respect to potential Polish Cyrillic orthography, and I don't really see any other way to resolve it, so if you do, let me know. Well, there is also a third option, and I know many people will be in favor of it. And that is to abandon the soft sign in favor of letters borrowed from Serbian or some other Cyrillic glyphs barely anyone's ever heard of. And I mean, this works, but at that point the alphabet has like 45 letters, which is way too many. I mean, how would you even fit them on a keyboard? And if you have to resort to scouring random Uralic languages or modifying Cyrillic letters with diacritics, I feel like you've given up on the argument that the script is better for Polish than Latin. I mean, aren't most of these letters glorified ligatures? You could do the same with Latin, or any other script for that matter. My take is that the way alphabets like Russian or Ukrainian mark palatalization, i.e. with iotated vowels and soft signs, is the cornerstone of the Cyrillic script. And if you discard that option, well then why even use Cyrillic specifically? Just, as I said, just go with Georgian, or Armenian, it has more vowels. There are some other minor issues with consonants. For example, if we say that codas are always palatalized with a soft sign, then we also need to know where syllable breaks occur word medially. Also, although l acts as a soft consonant, phonetically it's not, and it can be further palatalized in loanwords. I would just write a soft sign followed by an iotated vowel or a plain vowel. I've seen both in Russian. Speaking of loanwords, we would also have to figure out how to encode orthographically unassimilated loans in Cyrillic, which is not always obvious, but it could be a fun challenge. Even if all these issues are absolutely relevant, they don't occur that often. When I was trying to write Polish using Cyrillic, it was a very enjoyable experience, and only rarely did I have to scratch my head to figure out how to spell a word I was trying to write. Do I think it's better than Latin? No. In my opinion, both systems are equally good and equally flawed. If Polish had been using the script for a long time, some repair strategies would have been found along the way, but that didn't happen, so the script is not as perfect for the language as some people would have you think. I think if the current orthography had evolved to use, for example, an apostrophe for palatalization, which would be pretty much exactly the same as using a soft sign, and we changed those spooky digraphs to something more Angloid friendly, the number of people sneed posting about how horrible the Latin script is for Polish would go way down. Do I think our orthography would be better off like that? Hell no, leave it alone, it has its charm. Don't just turn it into a boring Czech clone, please. It wouldn't be intuitive to Polish speakers, but neither would a Cyrillic orthography, or anything else other than what we're using right now for that matter. You only find things intuitive because you've used them your whole life. End of story.